Margaret sat by the window of her quiet New England home, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her teacup as the rain fell in steady streams outside. At 71, the years had folded into her skin and her spirit alike, and yet, there was something restless within her that refused to settle. She had lived through loss, through seasons of silence, and through long stretches where the house itself seemed to echo her loneliness. But this evening, this ordinary rainy evening, something stirred differently. It began not with an event, but with a memory. She could almost hear the footsteps of her late husband Robert in the hallway, almost smell the faint cedar of his jacket when he leaned close. 11 years had passed since cancer took him, and though she had told herself she had moved on, the truth was that she had only learned to rearrange the emptiness. Moving on felt too much like betrayal. So she kept his books on the shelf, his coffee mug tucked in the corner of the cupboard, and the chair by the fire that no one else dared to sit in. Margaret had always been a woman who hid her storms inside. To her children, she was strong and steady, the matriarch who could weather anything. To her friends at church, she was kind and thoughtful, someone whose smile could warm a cold Sunday morning. But inside, she often felt like an empty room that had once held music but no longer knew the notes. That night, as she sat watching the rain blur the garden outside, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass. Her hair was silver now, her face etched with lines that spoke of laughter, tears, and endurance. But it wasn't the age that startled her. It was the way she looked, absent, as though she had forgotten how to be fully alive. For a fleeting second, she whispered to herself, "Is this all I have left?" The whisper lingered longer than she expected. It clung to her as she moved about the kitchen, as she straightened the living room, and as she prepared for bed. The next morning, she rose with that same unsettled energy pressing against her chest. For years she had ignored such feelings, burying them beneath routines and obligations. But something inside refused to be silenced anymore. Margaret walked into the small spare room at the back of the house, a space she hadn't entered in years. Dust clung to the shelves and an old easel leaned against the wall, draped in a sheet. Slowly, she pulled the sheet away, revealing brushes, paints, and a blank canvas that had waited silently for her return. She had once loved to paint, before Robert's illness, before grief swallowed her colors. Standing there now, she felt as though she was staring at a younger version of herself, one she had abandoned long ago. Her hand trembled as she lifted a brush. She dipped it into paint, hesitantly at first, almost afraid of what might come out. But as the bristles touched canvas, a rush of memory and emotion flooded through her. The first stroke was messy, uncertain, but it carried with it something more powerful than perfection. Permission. Permission to feel again, to create, to take up space in her own life. Days turned into weeks, and the once quiet room filled with the scent of oils and the splashes of color. Margaret painted her garden, the faces of her children, the golden fields she had walked in her youth. She painted her grief too, dark swirls that bled into light, jagged lines that softened as they stretched across the canvas. Each painting became a confession, an unspoken prayer, a step toward rediscovery. Her daughter, Anna, visited one Sunday and found Margaret surrounded by canvases. "Mom," she whispered, her eyes wide, "these are beautiful." Margaret laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. "They're not perfect," she replied, "but they're mine." What surprised Margaret most wasn't that she still remembered how to paint. It was how alive she felt doing it. For so long, she had thought her life was behind her, that her best chapters had already been written. But in that little room, brush in hand, she discovered there were still pages left to turn. She began to wake each morning with anticipation. Instead of silence, there was rhythm. Instead of emptiness, there was color. And though Robert's absence was still felt in every corner of the house, she realized that grief could live alongside joy. She didn't have to choose one or the other. She could carry both. Months later, Margaret gathered the courage to share her work at a small local gallery. Standing there, surrounded by strangers who studied her paintings with thoughtful eyes, she felt a swell of pride she hadn't known in decades. A woman approached her and said, "Your paintings feel alive. They tell a story." Margaret smiled, tears prickling her eyes. "They tell my story," she answered. That night, lying in bed, She whispered into the darkness, "I wasn't ready for this moment." But unlike before, it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a confession of wonder. She hadn't been ready to feel so alive again. She hadn't been ready to believe that life after 70 could still surprise her. And yet here she was, proving herself wrong, painting her way back into the world. Margaret's story was not about loss alone, nor about the loneliness that followed. It was about the quiet courage to begin again, even when the world told her she was too old, too tired, too late. It was about reclaiming the parts of herself she thought were gone forever. And in that reclamation, she discovered that the human heart never truly stops searching for beauty. Even in the twilight of life, there are still mornings worth waking up for, still canvases worth painting, still colors waiting to be seen. Margaret had once believed her story was ending. But with every brushstroke she realized, it was only just beginning.